Marcus Williams had served the royal family for 12 years without a single complaint. He stood guard at Buckingham Palace through rain, snow, and blazing summer heat. His red uniform was always perfect, his black boots polished to mirror shine, and his dedication absolute. But today, everything would change. The morning started like any other. Marcus finished his night shift at 6 a.m. and headed home to his small London flat. His daughter, Sarah, had been accepted to Cambridge University, and he had saved every penny for her tuition. The acceptance letter sat proudly on his kitchen table, next to a plane ticket to New York. His sister Emma was getting married in 3 days, and Marcus had promised to walk her down the aisle since their father had passed away 5 years ago. At Heathrow Airport, Marcus wore his only good civilian suit, a navy blue one he had bought for his father's funeral. He carried a small suitcase and the wedding rings Emma had entrusted to him. The flight was full, but Marcus had managed to get a seat using his military discount. He arrived early, went through security, and waited patiently at his gate. When boarding began, Marcus presented his ticket to the flight attendant. She smiled warmly and directed him toward the front of the plane. He followed the line of passengers, not paying much attention to where he was going. The stress of the long work week and excitement about seeing his sister had left him somewhat distracted. He found his assigned seat, 2A, and settled in, placing his small bag in the overhead compartment. The seat was incredibly comfortable, much better than he expected. Marcus had never flown first class before. He assumed the airline had upgraded him because of his military service, something he had heard happened occasionally. A few minutes later, a man in an expensive suit approached his row. The man was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with obvious wealth and importance. He checked his boarding pass, then looked at Marcus with confusion and growing irritation. "Excuse me," the man said loudly, "but I think you're in my seat." Marcus politely showed his boarding pass. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is seat 2A. That's what my ticket says." The wealthy passenger examined the boarding pass, and his face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous! How did someone like you get into first class? Look at this cheap suit. You clearly don't belong here." Other first-class passengers began to stare. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he remained calm and respectful. "Sir, I have a valid ticket. I'm not sure what the problem is." The man called over a flight attendant. "There's been some kind of mistake. This person is obviously in the wrong section. He needs to be moved immediately." The flight attendant, a young woman named Jennifer, looked uncomfortable. She examined both boarding passes and realized what had happened. There had been a computer error that double-booked the seat. According to airline policy, the passenger who boarded first should keep the seat. That was Marcus. But before Jennifer could explain, the wealthy passenger interrupted. "Do you see this man's clothes? His cheap bag? He obviously doesn't belong in first class. I fly this route every month for business. I know who the real first-class passengers are." Marcus tried to speak calmly. "Sir, I served in Her Majesty's Royal Guard for 12 years. I'm traveling to my sister's wedding. I have every right to be here with a valid ticket." The wealthy man laughed mockingly. "Royal Guard? You look more like a security guard at a shopping mall. If you were really military, you'd know how to dress properly." More passengers were watching now. Marcus felt humiliated, but tried to maintain his dignity. Jennifer, the flight attendant, was clearly torn. She knew Marcus was right, but she also recognized the wealthy passenger as someone important who flew with the airline frequently. The situation escalated when the wealthy passenger made a phone call. "Yes, I'm calling about the incompetent staff on Flight 447. There's someone in first class who clearly doesn't belong there, and your people won't handle it properly." Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He thought about his sister Emma, waiting for him in New York. He thought about the wedding rings in his pocket and his promise to walk her down the aisle. He had faced dangerous situations as a royal guard, but this public humiliation felt worse than any physical threat. The flight attendant returned with the cabin manager, an older man named Robert, who looked stressed and tired. Without asking for details or examining the boarding passes carefully, he made a quick decision based on appearances and complaints. "Sir," Robert said to Marcus, "we're going to need you to move to your assigned seat in economy class. There seems to be some confusion with the booking system." Marcus showed his boarding pass again. "This says seat 2A. I was told this was my seat." Robert barely glanced at the boarding pass. The wealthy passenger stood behind him, arms crossed, looking satisfied. "The system made an error," Robert said dismissively. "Your real seat is in the back. Please gather your things." Marcus realized what was happening. He was being kicked out not because of his ticket, but because of how he looked and who was complaining. The injustice burned inside him, but he had been trained to follow orders and maintain composure under pressure. He stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "I understand," he said quietly. As he reached for his bag, he made eye contact with several passengers who looked uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Some seemed ashamed, others angry, but no one spoke up. Marcus walked toward the back of the plane, carrying his small suitcase and his wounded pride. He didn't know that this moment would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire airline industry. The system that had just humiliated him was about to be broken in, ways no one could imagine. Marcus found his economy seat near the back of the plane, squeezed between a crying baby and a teenager with loud headphones. The contrast was jarring after the spacious comfort of first class. He stored his bag under the seat in front of him and tried to process what had just happened. The flight attendant who had witnessed the incident, Jennifer, came by during takeoff preparations. She looked genuinely upset and leaned down to whisper, "I'm so sorry about what happened up there. It wasn't right. You had the correct seat." Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." Jennifer glanced around, nervously. "The computer system definitely assigned you that seat. There was no error on your part. What happened was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Discriminatory. During the 8-hour flight to New York, Marcus had plenty of time to think." He wasn't angry about the uncomfortable seat or the inconvenience. What bothered him was the principle. He had served his country with honor, paid his taxes, and bought a legitimate ticket. Yet he had been treated like a second-class citizen because of his appearance and social status. He thought about all the times he had stood guard, protecting people who probably wouldn't give him a second glance on the street. He remembered the tourists who took photos with him at Buckingham Palace, treating him like a tourist attraction rather than a person. But this was different. This was personal humiliation based on prejudice. When the plane landed at JFK Airport, Marcus gathered his things and prepared to put the incident behind him. He had a wedding to attend and a sister to walk down the aisle, but as he stood to leave, something unexpected happened. A man in the row behind him tapped his shoulder. "Excuse me, are you the gentleman who was moved from first class?" Marcus nodded, unsure where this was going. "My name is David Chen. I'm a journalist for the Washington Post. I was sitting in first class and saw everything that happened. What I witnessed was completely unacceptable." David handed Marcus his business card. "I've been investigating discrimination in the airline industry for months. What happened to you is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. Would you be willing to talk about it?" Marcus looked at the card, then at David. "I just want to get to my sister's wedding. I don't want to make trouble." David understood. "I respect that. But, sir, what happened to you happens to other people every day. Good people who deserve better treatment. You have a platform to make a difference." Marcus pocketed the card. "Let me think about it." At the hotel in Manhattan, Marcus called his sister Emma. She could hear something was wrong in his voice immediately. "Marcus, what happened? You sound upset." He told her about the flight, downplaying the emotional impact but explaining the facts. Emma was furious. They kicked you out because of how you looked after 12 years serving the royal family? This is outrageous. Emma had always been the fighter in the family. While Marcus was calm and diplomatic, she was passionate and direct. You have to do something about this, Marcus. You can't let them get away with it. That evening, Marcus met his sister at a small Italian restaurant near her hotel. Emma was a successful lawyer in London, and she immediately began strategizing. "Do you realize what you have here?" she asked, pulling out her phone. "You have witnesses, a discriminatory act by a major corporation, and documentation of the entire incident. This isn't just about money. This is about changing how airlines treat people." Marcus was reluctant. "Emma, I don't want to become some kind of activist. I just want to live my life quietly." Emma leaned forward. "Marcus, remember when Dad was denied that promotion because of his accent? He never fought back, and he regretted it his entire life. He always said the system would never change if good people stayed silent. Their father had immigrated from Jamaica and worked as a mechanic for 40 years. Despite his skills and experience, he had been passed over for supervisory positions. Repeatedly, Marcus remembered his father's quiet frustration and dignity in the face of unfairness. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked. Emma smiled. "I'm suggesting we break their system, legally and completely." She explained that discrimination cases against airlines were notoriously difficult to prove because incidents usually happened without witnesses or documentation. But Marcus's case was different. Multiple passengers had witnessed it. The flight attendant had acknowledged the wrongdoing, and there was clear evidence of discriminatory treatment. "We don't just sue them," Emma continued. "We expose their entire pattern of behavior. I guarantee you this wasn't an isolated incident." That night, Marcus called David Chen, the journalist. They met the next morning at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. David had already done preliminary research. "I've found 6 other incidents involving this airline in the past 2 years. Military veterans, elderly passengers, people who didn't look the part for first class being moved or denied services." He showed Marcus news articles and social media posts. "There's a pattern here. But none of these previous cases got major attention because the victims didn't have your credibility and platform." Marcus was surprised. "What platform? I'm just a guard," David smiled. "You're a 12-year veteran of the Royal Guard with an impeccable service record. You were traveling to fulfill a family obligation. You handled the situation with complete dignity and class. You're exactly the kind of person the public will rally behind." Marcus spent the rest of the day walking through Central Park, thinking about his options. He could let it go, enjoy his sister's wedding, and return to his quiet life in London. Or he could take a stand that might help other people avoid the humiliation he had experienced. That evening at the wedding rehearsal dinner, Emma introduced him to her fiancé's brother, who happened to be a civil rights lawyer in New York. "Marcus," the lawyer said after hearing the story, "what happened to you was a violation of federal anti-discrimination laws, but more than that, it was a violation of basic human dignity. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Marcus looked around the room at his sister's friends and future family. These were good people who would support him whatever he decided, but he also thought about all the other people who might face similar treatment without the resources or support to fight back. "I want to break their system," Marcus said quietly. "Completely and permanently," the lawyer smiled. "Then let's get started." Emma's wedding was beautiful, but Marcus found it hard to focus completely on the celebration. During the ceremony, as he walked his sister down the aisle, he thought about dignity and standing up for what was right. Emma squeezed his arm and whispered, "Dad would be so proud of both of us today." After the wedding, Marcus met with attorney Michael Rodriguez, Emma's brother-in-law. Michael specialized in civil rights cases and had successfully sued major corporations for discriminatory practices. They met in his Manhattan office on Monday morning. "Marcus, I've reviewed the preliminary information, and you have an exceptionally strong case," Michael said. But I want you to understand what you're getting into. This won't be quick or easy. Airlines have teams of expensive lawyers and unlimited resources. Michael explained that the case would likely take 2 to 3 years to resolve. Marcus would face depositions, media attention, and attempts to discredit his character. The airline would investigate every aspect of his life looking for ammunition to use against him. Why would they work so hard to avoid admitting they made a mistake? Marcus asked. Because this isn't about one incident, Michael replied. If we can prove systematic discrimination, the financial consequences could be enormous. We're not just talking about compensating you. We're talking about forcing them to change their entire training program, policies, and corporate culture. Michael had already reached out to David Chen, the journalist, who was preparing a major investigative piece. David had found evidence that the airline's staff received informal guidance about which passengers belonged in premium sections. There were no written policies, but there was a clear pattern of behavior. The flight attendant, Jennifer, is willing to testify, Michael continued. She's disgusted by what she witnessed and wants to see changes made. That's huge for our case. Over the next week, while Marcus was still in New York, the legal team worked quickly. They filed a federal lawsuit alleging discrimination based on socioeconomic status and appearance. The case was designed to expose systemic problems, not just address one incident. Meanwhile, David Chen's article was published in the Washington Post. The headline read, "Royal Guard kicked out of first class when dignity has no seat assignment." The article went viral within hours. The story resonated with people from all backgrounds. Military veterans shared their own experiences with discrimination. Working-class passengers posted about feeling unwelcome in premium airline sections. The hashtag #OshaDignity has no seat assignment began trending on social media. The airline's initial response was predictably corporate and defensive. They issued a statement saying they were investigating the incident and were committed to treating all passengers with respect. They offered Marcus a refund and free flights, hoping to make the story disappear quietly. Marcus rejected the offer publicly. In a statement released through Michael's office, he said, "This isn't about money or free flights. This is about ensuring that no other person experiences the humiliation I felt. Airlines must treat all passengers with equal dignity, regardless of their appearance or social status." The airline's stock price dropped 3% in the first week after the story broke. Travel bloggers and social media influencers began sharing their own experiences with discriminatory treatment. The company was facing a public relations nightmare that was getting worse daily. Jennifer, the flight attendant, gave an exclusive interview to David Chen. She revealed that cabin crews received informal training about identifying passengers who might be seat upgrades versus those who had earned their premium seats. She described a culture where assumptions about passenger worthiness were based on clothing, jewelry, and perceived social status. "We were taught to look for signs that someone belonged in first class," Jennifer explained in the interview. "Expensive watches, designer clothing, confident demeanor. If someone seemed out of place, we were encouraged to double-check their ticket and look for reasons to move them." The airline immediately fired Jennifer for violating confidentiality agreements. This backfired spectacularly, as it appeared they were retaliating against a whistleblower. The pilots' union and flight attendants' union both issued statements, supporting Jennifer and criticizing the company's discriminatory practices. Marcus returned to London, but found that the story had followed him across the Atlantic. British media picked up the story with particular interest because of his Royal Guard service. The Daily Mail headline read, "Queen's Guard humiliated by American airline." The Guardian wrote an editorial about class discrimination in the travel industry. At Buckingham Palace, Marcus's commanding officer called him into a private meeting. Marcus expected to be reprimanded for attracting media attention, but instead found support. "Williams," the officer said, "the royal family is aware of this situation. While we cannot make public statements about legal matters, I want you to know that your conduct has been exemplary throughout this ordeal. You've represented the values we stand for with dignity and principle. The officer handed Marcus an official letter. You're being granted extended leave to pursue this matter to its conclusion. Your position here will be waiting when you return. Marcus was stunned. He had expected criticism, not support from his employers. Back in New York, Michael Rodriguez was building an even stronger case. 3 more airline employees had come forward anonymously with evidence of discriminatory training and practices. Internal company emails suggested that premium cabin ambiance was considered important for customer satisfaction, meaning that passengers who didn't fit a certain image were routinely moved or denied upgrades. The airline hired Harrison Burke and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the country, to handle the case. They immediately filed motions to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that Marcus had been treated according to standard overbooking policies and that no discrimination had occurred. But public pressure was building. Airport workers began sharing stories about witnessing discriminatory treatment. Travel agents reported that clients were specifically avoiding the airline. Celebrity endorsements and sponsorship deals were being reconsidered. Most importantly, other passengers who had witnessed similar incidents began coming forward. A video surfaced from someone's phone showing another incident where an elderly Latino man had been moved from business class under suspicious circumstances. The airline could no longer claim these were isolated incidents. Marcus received hundreds of letters and emails from people sharing their own experiences. A retired teacher wrote about being moved from an upgraded seat because her clothes weren't expensive enough. A young black doctor described being questioned extensively about his first-class ticket while white passengers boarded without scrutiny. I realized this was bigger than just my experience, Marcus later said. This was about a system that judged people's worth based on appearance and assumptions. If we could break that system, we could help thousands of people travel with dignity. The airline made one final attempt to settle the case quietly, offering Marcus a substantial financial payment and a public apology. But Marcus had moved beyond personal compensation. He wanted systemic change that would outlast any individual settlement. The case was moving toward trial, and the airline was beginning to understand that this wasn't going away. Their discriminatory system was about to face its biggest challenge, and Marcus Williams was the man who would break it completely. The airline's legal strategy became increasingly desperate as more evidence emerged. Harrison Burke and Associates tried to portray Marcus as an opportunistic troublemaker seeking financial gain from a simple misunderstanding. They hired private investigators to dig into his background, hoping to find something that would damage his credibility. What they found instead made their case worse. Marcus's military record was spotless. His commanding officers described him as one of the most dedicated and principled guards they had ever supervised. His neighbors in London spoke of a quiet, respectful man who helped elderly residents with groceries and shoveled snow from sidewalks in winter. The investigators also discovered something the airline wished they hadn't. Marcus had previously witnessed discrimination but never complained about it. 6 months before the flight incident, Marcus had been refused service at an upscale London restaurant while wearing his civilian clothes. He had simply left quietly without making a scene. This established a pattern of Marcus enduring discrimination rather than seeking confrontation or publicity. Michael Rodriguez used these findings to strengthen their case. The airline wants to paint Mr. Williams as someone who creates problems, he said in a press conference. The evidence shows exactly the opposite. He's someone who has consistently chosen dignity over conflict until the injustice became too clear to ignore. Meanwhile, David Chen's investigation had expanded into a comprehensive exposé of airline discrimination practices. His research revealed that major airlines routinely profiled passengers based on appearance, clothing, and perceived social status. Internal training documents from multiple carriers contained coded language about maintaining premium cabin standards and ensuring customer comfort. The most damaging evidence came from a leaked recording of a training session. In the audio, a supervisor could be heard instructing flight attendants to use good judgment when determining if passengers belonged in premium sections. When asked for specific criteria, the supervisor responded, "You'll know it when you see it. We want our first-class cabin to reflect the caliber of passenger we're trying to attract." This recording became the centerpiece of the case. It proved that discrimination wasn't the result of individual prejudice, but systematic policy designed to exclude certain types of passengers from premium sections. The airline's stock continued to fall as the story gained international attention. Travel industry analysts warned that the company faced billions in potential damages if systematic discrimination was proven in court. Institutional investors began selling their positions, and several major corporate clients canceled their travel contracts. In response, the airline announced a series of reforms clearly designed to influence public opinion before the trial. They hired a diversity consultant, implemented new training programs, and created a passenger advocacy office to handle discrimination complaints. Marcus wasn't impressed. These changes came only after they were caught, he said in an interview with BBC News. If they were truly committed to treating passengers fairly, these policies would have existed long before my experience. The most significant development came when the Department of Transportation announced its own investigation into airline discrimination practices. The federal inquiry would examine not just this airline, but industry-wide patterns of discriminatory treatment. This government attention elevated the case from a civil lawsuit to a potential criminal investigation. Airlines could face federal sanctions, lose operating licenses, and be forced to implement court-supervised reforms. The airline's board of directors held an emergency meeting. The CEO, who had initially dismissed the incident as a minor customer service issue, was forced to resign. His replacement immediately reached out to Marcus's legal team requesting settlement discussions. But Marcus had conditions. Any settlement would need to include comprehensive reforms, not just financial compensation. He wanted mandatory anti-discrimination, training for all employees, clear written policies about passenger treatment, and an independent oversight committee to monitor compliance. "I don't want their money," Marcus told Michael Rodriguez. "I want to make sure no other person goes through what I experienced." The airline's new CEO, Patricia Hayes, was a former civil rights attorney who understood the seriousness of the situation. She flew to London personally to meet with Marcus, something that surprised everyone involved in the case. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a conference room in a London hotel. Patricia came alone, without lawyers or corporate representatives. She wanted to understand Marcus's perspective without legal filtering. "Mr. Williams," she began, "I want to apologize personally for what happened to you. As someone who has spent my career fighting discrimination, I'm appalled that our company treated you this way." Marcus listened carefully. He could tell this apology was different from the corporate statements that had been issued previously. This felt genuine and personal. Patricia continued, "I'm not here to negotiate a settlement. I'm here to understand what changes you believe are necessary to prevent this from happening again." They talked for 2 hours. Marcus described not just his own experience, but the letters he had received from other passengers. He talked about the systemic nature of the problem and the need for comprehensive reform. "The issue isn't individual bad behavior," Marcus explained. "It's a culture that values appearance over character, assumptions over facts. Your employees weren't necessarily bad people, but they were operating in a system that encouraged discriminatory thinking." Patricia took extensive notes. She asked detailed questions about Marcus's proposed reforms and listened to his ideas about employee training and customer service policies. At the end of the meeting, Patricia made an unexpected offer. "Mr. Williams, would you consider working with us to design these reforms?" not as a settlement but as a partnership to create real change in the airline industry? Marcus was surprised but intrigued. "What exactly are you proposing?" Patricia outlined her vision. The airline would accept responsibility for systematic discrimination and agree to court-supervised reforms. Marcus would work with an independent team to design new training programs and policies. The airline would fund a passenger advocacy center staffed by civil rights experts. Most importantly, the reforms would be shared freely with other airlines, creating industry-wide changes that could help millions of passengers. Marcus asked for time to consider the proposal. This was bigger than he had imagined when he first decided to fight back. The system that had humiliated him could potentially be broken and rebuilt in a way that protected everyone. That evening, Marcus called his sister Emma. "They want to make me part of the solution," he told her, "but I'm not sure if I can trust them." Emma was characteristically direct. "Marcus, you didn't start this fight to punish them. You started it to create change. If they're genuinely offering to make the changes you want, isn't that exactly what you've been fighting for?" Marcus spent the night walking through London, thinking about the proposal. By morning, he had made his decision. He would work with the airline, but only under specific conditions that would ensure the reforms were real and lasting. The system was about to be broken, but instead of simply destroying it, Marcus would help build something better in its place. Marcus accepted Patricia Hayes's proposal, but with conditions that would ensure real accountability. The agreement had to be legally binding, subject to federal oversight, and include financial penalties if the airline failed to implement the promised changes. Michael Rodriguez negotiated the details with the airline's legal team. The final agreement was unprecedented in the aviation industry. The airline would pay $12 million to establish an independent passenger dignity institute, which would monitor discrimination complaints and design training programs for the entire industry. Marcus would receive personal compensation, but he immediately announced that he would donate most of it to organizations fighting discrimination in travel and hospitality industries. "This was never about personal gain," he said at a press conference announcing the settlement. "It was about creating a system where every passenger is treated with equal respect." The most innovative aspect of the agreement was the creation of dignity auditors, independent monitors who would travel undercover on flights to observe passenger treatment. These auditors would represent various demographics and economic backgrounds, providing real-time feedback about discriminatory practices. The airline also agreed to hire Jennifer, the flight attendant who had been fired for speaking out, as Director of Customer Equality. Her job would be to train staff and investigate discrimination complaints. Jennifer had become a symbol of ethical courage in the airline industry, and her appointment sent a clear message about the company's commitment to change. The formal signing ceremony took place at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington. Federal officials attended to emphasize that this agreement would serve as a model for industry-wide reforms. Marcus wore his Royal Guard dress uniform, symbolizing the dignity and service that had been disrespected during his original flight. But the real work was just beginning. Marcus took a leave of absence from his Royal Guard position to spend 6 months designing the new training programs. He worked with civil rights experts, airline employees, and customer service professionals to create comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols. The training programs were built around real scenarios rather than abstract concepts. Flight attendants and gate agents practiced handling situations where passengers might not look the part for premium services. They learned to recognize and overcome their own unconscious biases. One training exercise recreated Marcus's original experience. Employees had to decide how to handle conflicting seat assignments without making assumptions about passenger worthiness. The lesson was clear. Treat all passengers with equal respect, regardless of appearance, clothing, or perceived social status. The most powerful part of the training was personal testimony from discrimination victims. Marcus shared his story, but So did dozens of other passengers who had faced similar treatment. A successful businesswoman described being questioned extensively about her first-class ticket while traveling in casual clothing. A military veteran talked about being moved from an upgraded seat because his prosthetic leg made other passengers uncomfortable. These stories had a profound impact on airline employees. Many admitted they had never considered how their assumptions affected passenger experiences. Flight attendants who had worked for decades said the training changed their entire approach to customer service. The program expanded beyond the original airline. Patricia Hayes shared the training materials freely with competitors, industry associations, and international carriers. What had started as one company's response to discrimination became a global movement for passenger dignity. Marcus found himself becoming an unexpected spokesperson for civil rights in the travel industry. He spoke at conferences, consulted with other airlines, and worked with government agencies developing anti-discrimination policies. His calm, dignified approach to advocacy made him an effective voice for change. 6 months after the settlement, the first audit results were released. The original airline showed dramatic improvement in passenger treatment across all demographic groups. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 80%, and customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. More importantly, other airlines were voluntarily implementing similar programs. The industry had realized that treating passengers with dignity wasn't just ethically right, it was good business. Airlines with better diversity and inclusion practices were seeing higher customer loyalty and fewer legal problems. The Passenger. Dignity Institute published its first annual report documenting discrimination trends across the aviation industry. The data showed that while problems persisted, significant progress was being made. Airlines were hiring more diverse staff, implementing clearer policies, and creating better complaint resolution processes. Marcus was invited to speak at the International Air Transport Association's annual conference. Standing before hundreds of airline executives, he reflected on how far the industry had come in just 1 year. "When I was moved from my seat, I felt humiliated and powerless," Marcus told the audience. "But that experience taught me that one person standing up for what's right can create changes that help millions of others. The system that discriminated against me has been broken and rebuilt into something better." He paused, looking out at the executives who now hung on his every word. "Every passenger who boards your aircraft is someone's father, mother, sister, or brother. They deserve to be treated with the same dignity you would want for your own family members." The response was a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Several airline CEOs approached Marcus afterward to request consulting agreements for their own companies. But Marcus's most meaningful moment came during a routine flight from London to Paris 6 months later. He was traveling for a Passenger Dignity Institute meeting, flying economy class as he usually did. The flight attendant recognized him and quietly upgraded him to first class. "Mr. Williams," she said, "I went through your training program last month. It changed how I see my job and how I treat passengers. Thank you for making all of us better at what we do." As Marcus settled into his first-class seat, this time without controversy or humiliation, he thought about his father, who had endured discrimination silently throughout his life. He thought about his sister Emma, who had encouraged him to fight back. And he thought about all the passengers who would travel with greater dignity because one person had refused to accept unequal treatment. The system had been broken completely. But from its ruins, something better had been built, a system based on respect, equality, and the fundamental principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Marcus smiled as the plane took off, knowing that his journey from humiliation to transformation was complete. But the real victory wasn't his personal vindication. It was the knowledge that millions of future passengers would travel in a world where their worth wasn't judged by their appearance or social status. The Royal Guard, who had been kicked out of first class, had done something far more important than reclaiming his seat. He had reclaimed the dignity of every person who would follow in his footsteps. 2 years after the settlement, Marcus returned to his position at Buckingham Palace, but he was no longer the same man who had quietly endured discrimination. He had become a powerful voice for change, and his influence extended far beyond the aviation industry. The Passenger Dignity Institute had grown into an international organization monitoring discrimination in transportation, hospitality, and service industries. Similar programs were being implemented by cruise lines, luxury hotels, and even high-end restaurants. The concept of dignity auditing had become a standard practice across multiple industries. Marcus continued working as a royal guard while serving as chairman of the Institute's board. His commanding officers were proud of the recognition he had brought to the Royal Guard service, and his story had become part of the training curriculum for new guards about maintaining dignity under pressure. The airline that had originally discriminated against him had become the industry leader in passenger equality practices. Their customer satisfaction scores remained the highest in the industry, and they had won multiple awards for diversity and inclusion. Patricia Hayes often credited Marcus with saving the company from potential bankruptcy through his willingness to work collaboratively rather than seeking pure punishment. Jennifer, the flight attendant who had spoken out against discrimination, had been promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience. Under her leadership, the airline had hired and promoted more diverse staff than any of their competitors. She often spoke alongside Marcus at industry conferences, emphasizing how speaking up against injustice had advanced rather than hurt her career. The most significant long-term impact was legislative. Congress passed the Passenger Equal Treatment Act, requiring all airlines operating in the United States to implement anti-discrimination training and maintain detailed records of passenger complaints. The law included whistleblower protections for employees who reported discriminatory practices, ensuring that others could follow Jennifer's example without fear of retaliation. International aviation organizations adopted similar standards. The International Civil Aviation Organization created global guidelines for passenger dignity that were implemented by airlines in over 50 countries. Marcus's experience had literally changed how airlines operated worldwide, but the personal transformations were equally remarkable. Marcus received thousands of letters from people who said his story had inspired them to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. A teacher in Texas successfully challenged discriminatory discipline policies at her school. A retail worker in California fought back against biased customer service training. A hotel employee in Florida reported managers who treated guests differently based on race and appearance. Marcus kept every letter, reading them during quiet moments at Buckingham Palace. Each story reminded him that breaking one discriminatory system had given others the courage to challenge injustice wherever they found it. 3 years after his original flight, Marcus was invited to the White House to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The ceremony honored civilians who had made significant contributions to civil rights and social justice. Marcus stood alongside other recipients, including civil rights lawyers, community organizers, and equality advocates. Marcus Williams showed us that one person's refusal to accept discrimination can transform entire industries, the president said during the ceremony. His dignity in the face of injustice and his commitment to systemic change rather than personal revenge exemplify the best of American values. After receiving the medal, Marcus was approached by a young woman who looked familiar. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, David Chen's daughter. "Mr. Williams," she said, "my father's reporting on your story inspired me to become a civil rights lawyer. I start work next week at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division." Marcus was moved to learn that his story was inspiring the next generation of civil rights advocates. He realized that the impact of standing up for dignity extended far, beyond any single incident or industry. Later that year, Marcus published a book titled "Dignity Has No Seat Assignment: One Guard's Fight to Change an Industry." The book became a bestseller, with proceeds supporting scholarship programs for students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in law, journalism, and public service. The book tour took Marcus around the world, speaking to audiences about the importance of standing up against discrimination. In London, he spoke to a packed auditorium at the Royal Albert Hall. In New York, he addressed the United Nations Human Rights Council. In Geneva, he consulted with international aviation officials on global anti-discrimination standards. During one speech at Cambridge University, Marcus was introduced by his daughter Sarah, who had graduated with honors and was now working as a civil rights lawyer herself. "My father taught me that true courage isn't the absence of fear," she told the audience. "It's doing what's right despite being afraid." Marcus's speech that day was simple but powerful. "I never intended to become an activist or change an industry," he said. "I was simply a man who was tired of being treated as less than human because of how I looked. But I learned that when good people refuse to accept injustice, they can create changes that help millions of others." 5 years after the original incident, Marcus was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for flight attendants at the airline's training center. The facility had been renamed the Marcus Williams Center for Customer Dignity, and his portrait hung in the main lobby alongside the company's core values: respect, equality, and service. The graduating class was the most diverse in the airline's history, with students from dozens of countries and all economic backgrounds. During his speech, Marcus looked out at the young faces and saw the future of an industry that had been fundamentally transformed. "You are entering a profession that serves people from every walk of life," Marcus told the graduates. "Remember that every passenger has a story, dreams, and dignity that deserve your respect. The uniform you wear represents not just your airline, but the values of equality and service that make travel a bridge between cultures rather than a barrier." After the ceremony, a young flight attendant approached Marcus. "Sir, I want to thank you," she said. "My grandmother was denied service at restaurants because of her accent. She always told me that change happens when good people refuse to stay silent. Your story proved she was right." Marcus smiled, thinking of his own father who had endured discrimination quietly. The cycle had been broken, and future generations would inherit a world where dignity wasn't determined by appearance or social status. Today, Marcus continues his dual role as Royal Guard and civil rights advocate. The Passenger Dignity Institute operates in 15 countries, monitoring discrimination and training service industry employees. Airlines around the world display placards with Marcus's famous quote, "Dignity has no seat assignment." When tourists take photos with Marcus at Buckingham Palace, many recognize him from his story. Children often ask their parents about the guard who changed the airlines. Their parents explain that sometimes one person standing up for what's right can change the world. Marcus's story became more than just a case of airline discrimination. It became a symbol of how ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. The system that once humiliated him had been completely broken and rebuilt into something that protected everyone. The Royal Guard, who was kicked out of first class, had done something far more valuable than reclaiming his seat. He had reclaimed the dignity of every person who would travel after him, creating a legacy that would protect millions of future passengers from the discrimination he had faced. In breaking the system, Marcus Williams had built something better. A world where every person's dignity had a guaranteed seat assignment.